I got that. Okay, good morning, everybody. This is the 10th GenWise Education Adda. The topic today is nature learning. Now, GenWise itself does not focus especially on nature learning because of the broad range of things we cover. Of course, nature is an element in our programs, and especially Radha has been using it in her courses. We've been on very green campuses. We've taken children to Auroville. I will share a blog post I had written about how a personal connection to nature is very important before one can, talk about things like conservation and sustainability and so on. So let me introduce the people who will be the key panelists on today's conversation. So we have Veena Kapoor, who heads the research and education and public engagement program at Nature Conservation Foundation. It's a fantastic, it's a very interesting organization. I will share the link and I will allow Veena to talk a little bit more about what they do, especially in the public engagement space. So Veena has over 2 decades of experience in ecology, conservation research, and nature education now in the last 5 years. She has a master's in ecology from Pondicherry University and also an MPhil in conservation leadership. I didn't even know that there was such a discipline, but I'm thankful that because I think without leaders, nothing can happen. And this was at the University of Cambridge, UK. This was a Ravi Shankaran INLAC's fellowship. So as a conservationist and a researcher, she's done work in Valparai. Some of you may have visited on vacation, but there are people working in these locations as well. So she studied rainforest restoration. She studied using spiders as an indicator species for the health of the environment. And for the last 5 years, her focus has been more on education and public engagement along with her colleagues. And they do very interesting work with schools and school teachers. She will talk a bit about that. And even as a grown-up, you can engage with stuff. There's a lot of very interesting citizen science initiatives, season watch and bird watch and other things. So you don't have to be just in school to sort of, participate in this. So Radha will be sort of driving the sort of conversation, asking Veena questions and sharing her own views. Radha has, she's a biologist, microbiologist actually, till her master's. After that, she studied environmental science. She worked 18 years as an environmental consultant in India, in US, in the Middle East. And after that, she sort of has donned the hat of I would say an educator, a researcher, an advocate. She does a lot of advocacy, especially around food security and sustainability issues. So Radha has, she taught at Rishi Valley for 8 years. She continues to be on the board of the school in terms of guiding certain things. So Radha has been, is still associated with Azim Premji University on their sustainability program. She's been associated with GenWise over the last 4 or 5 years, sort of bringing this whole idea of interconnectedness, not just in the space of nature, but also in society and economics and other facets. So that's pretty much in terms of introductions. And Radha, if you can just, take the conversation forward, that would be great.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. And it's an absolute pleasure, to have this conversation with Veena, because apart from, this is a very formal, sort of more of a formal platform where we're talking to each other, because otherwise Veena and I are constantly talking about various things that excite and interest us. So Veena, I was just thinking, so really today is going to be more of a conversation where we are going to probably, sort of share our own experiences, but also, reflect on a few things, in the current context as well, right? So Veena, I thought maybe we could, kickstart our chat by sort of trying to understand what is it that we really understand by nature learning, right? I mean, because, whether you're studying physics or chemistry or biology, you study about laws of nature, you study about chemistry in natural systems, biology, you study about plants, animals, etc. But, in addition to all of this, when we say nature learning, what do we really mean by it? And it would be great if you could share your thoughts with some of your experiences as well. Yeah.
Sure, I can do that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Radha. And so I think, would you like to also like me to talk a little bit about NCF and its work?
Yeah, that would be lovely. Yeah,
so maybe
really
tend
nice.
to put it in context.
Put it in context. Exactly.
Exactly. So the organization I'm part of, Nature Conservation Foundation, we have our offices in Mysore in Bangalore. And also we have field stations across the country. We primarily do research work on wildlife conservation. And so we typically, situate ourselves in different geographical locations. And we do our research work and our outreach work there. And so many of our programs have been going on for decades, so almost more than 2 decades now. And so we also work very closely with the communities that share the space in those. And so depending on the geographic, the locality we are in, so for example, if we're in Spiti and Ladakh, the main focus of our research work and our conservation work would be the snow leopard. But we also work around the species over there, the other species and habitats which also are there, and the communities which are part of this landscape as well. But most of our work is situated in research. Right. So in the Northeast, we work on hornbills, and we also work in the Lakshadweep on coral reefs. So, like I said, we work closely with the communities over there. Right. Now, as part of this work, we do a lot of conservation education work as well. But often these are, education and outreach kind of projects, which, are trying to address a particular conservation issue. So, for example, there might be a conservation education project which revolves around, say, if there's an issue of hunting of hornbills in a particular area. So then we kind of try and, figure out as a team, how do we address this issue, keeping in mind that, some of the cultural kind of situations as well in, in these areas, that sometimes local communities, hunting is part of their culture. So how do you sensitively kind of deal with issues like this? So in some cases we do, work with schools and school children, but often these are outside of the school system. So we take them on nature walks, or, in places like Spiti and Ladakh, we've been having, nature camps where we take groups of children outside to experience, the mountain ecosystem. And then we have activities around that. So for the last few years, what we've been kind of trying to do, and those are important, those should continue, some of those out of school kind of intervention programs should continue, taking, children and adults for nature walks. But we started thinking that a lot of you might be aware that, environmental studies and environmental sciences compulsory as a subject in our school because of various reasons, right? The Supreme Court decided that it's an important subject to add, but and so the intention was very good, but like many of us who are working in the space, we realize that it's become a typical subject, a school subject now, right? And it's more about information, and it's more about the didactic kind of approach for the subject. And the very crucial element of the wonder and the fascination of nature and the things that you find around you, and how do you go about discovering things, and how do you get a connect with nature is missing. Crucially, we also found that teachers who are taking this subject are not trained, are not aware of what needs to be kind of transacted in an environmental sciences kind of thing, and so they rely on the textbooks, which are like any other school textbook that we see. And so often these are also teachers who are substitute teachers or class teachers where no one else wants to take the subject, so they're taking it. And so they were coming to us and said, how do we teach this subject? So for me, nature studies is actually anything to do with trying to have a connect with the outside world, with with a tree, with an insect, with a spider, with with the soil, And how you have that connect and how you need to introduce nature to groups of people, I think, and many of us will agree, is that it should be age appropriate. The
That's
way
right.
you
Absolutely.
introduce
Absolutely.
nature to
Absolutely.
children.
And because you were talking about that, I was just thinking, there's one phrase I know you've used often, and I believe in that too, is this whole idea of an immersive experience. I mean, as you were talking, and I like the way you separated, the conservation education part, and then this whole idea of, how do you actually take it to the next level? And when we talk about nature learning, that it's an immersive experience, right? I mean, that you are taking, whether it's children or adults, they, what I wanted to also ask you to talk a little more about is, this idea of immersing yourself in nature. How early does it start for one, right? And one goes back to one's childhood, or is it a memory later? And I was just thinking about, we talked a little bit on Twitter about it, about Wangari Maathai, about how she said that, that fig tree and those I was just thinking of the frog's eggs which she used to play with as a child, and then that stream dried up because that fig tree had been removed, and it's that memory that got her to the Nobel Prize eventually for the work she did. So a lot of us have gone through similar sort of childhood experiences, which are, so in your work and also just with your experience, how early or how important do you think is this whole idea of nature learning or immersing oneself in nature? And how early does one start? What are the benefits in a sense of that, not just in the experience, but even in other things? I know you have a lot of, sort of experience with that. Yes.
So I would actually encourage, all the participants in this, in this kind of, in this lecture to actually take this opportunity to reflect back a little bit on their own childhood and, think about how they grew up and in what kind of environments they grew up and what kind of access they had to nature. Because that's also something a lot of people have been talking about and doing a lot of research on, where they're calling something called the shifting baseline syndrome, where every generation's normal for what nature is and what surrounds them, differs now. And so that becomes the normal. So as we're losing access to nature, every generation, we're losing a very crucial element, in our connection to nature and to the world. So I would say that, it's a great way to kind of situate and to also pass on this knowledge to either your students or to your own children. So I would say that our kind of connection to nature, or how we need to, or anybody can learn nature as early as possible. Even a young kid, if given, a pebble or a leaf, can engage with it very nicely, right? And they say that, at a much younger age, and education theory kind of backs this up, at a much younger age, children are still kind of exploring. It's all about themselves. It's about what they kind of explore, and what they make out of it. So to encourage them to even become a leaf, for example, right? A lot of education people or nature education people say that when you take young kids, especially out, ask them to imagine that they're birds, or ask them to imagine that they're fish. And this is why I think as kids, when we read a lot of fantasy-based books, we got into those worlds.
That's right.
Right? And then as young kids, I think to encourage that itself plays a huge role in them having a connect to nature.
Right.
And to remind ourselves that we don't have to go far away to have a connect or to experience nature, that we can actually kind of create situations where nature can be around us as well. Right. So even one small plant in the house, and asking a child to maybe even put a seed, to see it grow, to talk to it, to treat it like it's, the child's friend, and to have that sense of nurturing, also apparently is hugely beneficial for young children to build empathy, especially, right? And you need, if you don't have empathy and a sense of wonder and love, why would you want to protect something at a much later age?
That's true. That's true. And also,
so we work with the philosophy that at a much younger age, you start with that. Just to build a connect with nature by introducing children, by just having conversations with them. So one of the schools we worked with for the very young kids, for the first standard kids, they have 2-3 big trees outside their school building. Otherwise, it's just a concrete block. So we asked the teachers, can we take them out? And they said, yes, but there's nothing around. The teacher said, we said, no, there are these 2-3 trees. Let's go and explore them. And often as environmental or nature educators, you have to think on your feet, right? It's also what is available or accessible to you outside. So we looked at this tree and we said, okay, these are young kids. We can, play around with them a little bit without them getting embarrassed. So we asked the kids to, look at the tree and have a conversation with the tree. And we said also, if you feel like it, go and give a hug to the tree. And that was a huge hit with the young kids. They just went over there and they were hugging the tree and saying,
how old were these? Sorry, how old were
these?
These
were first standard kids, really young.
6. Yeah, 6.
So the teachers were a bit skeptical, but they were kind of viewing this from afar, and they were having conversations with it. They were hugging it. Then some of them were a bit saying that there are ants, and we said it's okay. Look at the ants. If you don't want to touch it, it's fine. Go to the other side and touch the tree. And so they were having conversations with the tree. And what was interesting, what the teachers then told us later, because when we went back and we told them, can you draw or write a little bit about how you felt about what you did? And the teacher came to us, and we didn't prompt or ask her anything. She came and said, this is the first time I'm seeing that they're so creative with their kind of, the way they were kind of emoting to us and telling us what they felt. And they're saying, usually we take them and ask them to draw a tree, they just draw the usual kind of tree. But because they were kind of connecting with the tree, they started drawing the little grooves on the barks. They've added little ants which were having conversations with each other. And
actually, the observation, I mean, one of the things of science, right? One of the things about studying science, it's about observation, right? I mean, it's about observation, and it's about recording it, and about systematically sort of documenting what you saw, right? And because you were talking about creativity, I was thinking, like Ken Robinson keeps talking about how creativity is being killed by the school system, But, something like this. So at this point, I was wondering, I remember you saying, and we've sort of talked about this before, where, it's not just of course, empathy is such an important aspect of our lives, right? But the other element being that, often I'm asked this question that, so does this really have an impact on other learning processes,
Absolutely.
on cognition and how they respond to other, learning? So maybe it would be interesting to hear you speak a little bit to that, because I know you were talking about the research that has gone in.
Yes.
Please,
so there is a lot of research which is now showing that, that a child's connection to nature, and the connection to nature comes from also spending a lot of time with nature and feeling a sense of space and safety within that thing. And so, some of it are kind of situations which we also have to help with. That has a huge effect on a positive effect in terms of the child's mental health, in terms of the child's physical health, in terms of their creative abilities, in terms of stress. So a lot of psychological kind of issues as well, anger management. And of course, because they have this empathy is kind of built within this process, they also have a sense of fairness when they start growing up, and they're able to kind of reason with each other. Also are much more caring individuals to each other. They like to discuss, and their logical reasoning apparently also is much higher.
Improves, yes.
Improves. And as a teacher, I'm sure you have seen this as well.
Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking about, the effect that it has had and particularly when you watch children from a very young age and you're with them till they sort of, say I've been with kids from 6th standard to like 10th or 11th standard, and you really see the progression and how it also impacts the choices they make in life. Right? And also I was just thinking here that, often you find that children, children say, particularly less than 10 or less than 6 years old or 8 years old, they are very comfortable in nature. But so as adults and as parents often, right? I mean, this is something that also, and it worries a lot of parents that, I mean, I've had questions like this when we've gone out with children that, are you sure? Because my child is allergic to something. And I can see that as a very legitimate worry,
Absolutely.
And so then the question really is about, how do we as adults, whether it's parents or teachers, how do we, what is our role really in this whole process of nature learning and, bringing this engagement about? Yeah.
I would again say that, again, it depends a little bit on age group.
Yeah.
So if you do have much younger children,
Right.
if you're teaching younger children, I would say encourage that sense of curiosity, wonder, and love.
Right.
And to try not to talk about, the more negative kind of global warming,
Right.
climate change kind of issues.
Right.
Because that's really a gloom and doom kind of a situation. And for a young kid who has nothing to do with the
Right.
state of the world,
Right.
and also doesn't have an agency to try and make a change,
Right. Right.
why should you burden them with that, right?
That's right.
And we hear of cases where children have come back, my colleagues' children have come back crying, saying that my teacher told me Bangalore is going to be uninhabitable in the next few years.
Right. I know.
Of course, the parent, my colleague, was upset about this because I think for older children, it's good to have these conversations.
Yes.
But to have honest conversations about the state of the world, because that's the media telling us also what's happening,
Right.
and they can see that the world is changing.
That's right.
But I think we as parents or as educators or teachers have to also give young adults the sense of hope that there can be a change which is possible.
Absolutely.
And lay out that path and give them a sense of confidence that they have the agency to make a change.
Oh, absolutely. Right? Yeah.
Because
very
as they get older also, so the hope is that they have, experienced nature in terms of, sense of wonder, empathy, etc. And they're excited about it. And then as they get a little older, they're starting to make sense of connections between nature. Right?
That's right.
In terms
That's
of how are we connected to nature as
That's
humans, and that we are part of the larger ecosystem.
Absolutely.
One problem which our textbooks have, and which is what we're trying to change, is that it's a very human-centric kind of way of what nature gives us.
Yeah.
So it's like leaves do this for us.
Right.
And so
and kind of utilitarian too, no? Very utilitarian.
Very utilitarian. So some of our nature kind of learning interventions are here, where we're saying that yes, humans use leaves, but here's how birds use leaves. Here's how animals use leaves as well. So, a tailor bird uses leaves as well. A snake uses leaves for that. I showed you some of our visuals. And so when we tell this to teachers, also we can see something clicking in their head saying, oh, we didn't think of this. There's a chapter on, just quickly, I'll tell you, there's another chapter on hygiene as well.
Right.
And it talks about how children should take care of themselves. It's in the EVS textbook, right?
Right.
Bathe and be clean.
Yeah, bathe and wash and all. Yes.
So now you'll think, okay, where is the nature learning kind of element in this? And so we put together visuals of how animals take care of themselves in terms of hygiene.
Lovely.
Right? So you have a bird getting into a bird bath and,
Correct. That's beautiful. Yes.
And this is for much younger kids. So you're just showing them that lots of animals do things like us. Nature around us is like us. But as you get older, you start talking about connections in nature, right? So you bring in the more ecological concepts in terms of, how are we dependent on nature? How is nature
correct?
How talk about pollination and how that's important even for our own food.
That's right.
And then at a later stage, when you feel that, or when they feel they have an agency to try and do something,
right?
Start talking to them in terms of having conversations with, say, society around them, or even in the school. We're so far removed from the spaces that we also occupy in terms of our own neighborhoods. Can you go and talk to people, say, under even of, these Ashwath Kattes are there in Bangalore, all over the place, in fig trees. A lot of people sit under that. So can older kids go there and talk to them about the importance of this tree? Why are they sitting there and using that space, for example?
Correct.
And we think that that's a very powerful way to engage with, nature. So
with nature.
Find yourself and the teachers that you don't have to go far away to do nature learning experience. You can actually have everything, in your own immediate
around you. Yeah. That's a very, very powerful point. And Vishnu, do we have?
I'm just, Radha, what I'm thinking is we still have 15-20 minutes. Maybe if the participants have some questions or comments,
absolutely,
we could listen to that and let that guide the remaining time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if you have any question or comment, you can just unmute yourself. Ideally, show yourself as well, and
that would be nice.
That will be nice.
That'd be lovely. Yeah.
So Astha, Archita, Ananya, Sandhya, Sukanya, any of you.
Yeah. So while we sort of wait for any sort of comments and questions, and I was wondering if, we could maybe
so Radha,
also
there is
talk
one
about,
question on Facebook Live.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
maybe you can, address that
Sure.
while, the others get ready.
Sure.
So there is a question which asks, do you have ideas about how an urban city can be immersed in nature other than occasional foray into once or twice a year school or family trips to Auroville, Navadarshanam? I mean, very
Nice.
related to what Veena was just
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's a good one, because I was thinking now that with the whole lockdown situation as well. So, Veena, if you could also talk about both, the question that's being asked, and related to that, how does one address it in the current under the current constraints?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like current times to remind us about how important nature is, right? And and there's enough evidence to show that because we're messing with nature and there's deforestation, that a lot of these diseases are emerging.
Correct.
And so again, if you have older children, it's a good time to have a conversation with them about it.
Right.
So I'll quickly take the question in terms of in a very highly urban city.
Yes.
I don't know which city this person is coming from, but I would say that even in a highly concretized kind of city like Bangalore, we see a lot of nature still, right? It's a kind of a way of also training yourself to and situating yourself to look at nature. I'll give you an example. So I live in the north part of Bangalore, which is still fairly residential. A lot of trees around, slowly getting built up, but these little pockets of empty plots around and few trees around have meant that we find God knows 50 plus species of birds around and innumerable insects and spiders that we come across, and I've been documenting these kind of things. And so I would say in a place like even in the city, even having pots, if it's possible to have in your balcony or even inside, and to not keep a very manicured kind of a space, right? If we have this vision of how nature should be based on a lot of visuals that come from the West. And unfortunately, that means it's like this lawn, sometimes it's an artificial lawn, which doesn't have any diversity. So I live in an apartment, it's a 3-story apartment. I have 2 balconies. I've put in a lot of potted plants, right? But I do not do any weeding around those plants. Right. I just let it be. Right. And so from the soil, a lot of grass comes. It's fascinating to see how a lot of insects and birds come only because of this. So no one else gets this, but it's creating this little diverse microhabitat and system for animals and birds to come and access. And people are like, why do so many insects and birds come to your house? What do you keep? I don't do anything. I just leave it. So, so sometimes our idea of what nature is also is important to kind of reflect, have conversations with people who are working in the field, try and do a little bit of reading up, see what is what makes sense in a place like India or in a city where you are, where a local kind of situations really make a lot of difference.
Even walking through the city, right? I mean, Bangalore's got so many trees, and I'm just thinking, we have all of us have a friend, Ajay Weiss, who when he's walking through the city, I mean, every time he sees a tree, we get a whole bunch of questions about the tree, and then we keep saying, okay, look at the fruit, look at the leaves. I mean, and this is not, so the thing is that to immerse oneself in nature in an urban environment, and I know that you, as part of your work, have developed a lot of interesting, because, for a lot of people, it's where do I start, right? And you folks have developed a lot of tools and little, sort of instruments which can be used or little games and stuff like that to kickstart the process, which allows for that kind of an immersion in nature and even sort of push you to look around you within your house, like say, for example, in the current situation. So immersing oneself in nature, and I mean, for me, it's like, even just growing a vegetable.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
because you begin to observe, okay, these are the flowers. And I know Soumya and I were having this conversation yesterday about why isn't this fruiting? Oh, is that a female flower or not? Then how do you hand pollinate? And then you begin to really So
start engaging with it.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. That's how you sort of begin to immerse yourself in
No, and
nature.
you'll be surprised that like any city would still
Yes.
have a lot of kind of
Yes.
nature
Yes.
around. And
Yes.
again, it's what our definition of nature is.
Yeah.
Yes, there are trees,
Yeah.
but when you start you'll start finding spiders and insects all over.
Correct.
And if you're in a city with lots of lakes like Bangalore, I think a lot of bird watchers and a lot of people are kind of engaged with nature and nature watching simply because of the accessibility of lakes in our city. It's slowly going away, but it's because of the uniqueness of the way, in terms of accessing birds quite close by, and especially water birds, has allowed for a huge kind of bird watching community to emerge in Bangalore. And so if you have spaces like that in the city you are in, explore it. Take your students, take your children out. Again, in the schools we work with, teachers often tell us, to teach this chapter on, they have usual in the textbook, they have to teach them about what is the difference between trees, shrubs, herbs, and climbers. And many of the teachers have told us, we'll take them to Bannerghatta and show them, but it's only after 4 months. That's when our field trip is. So we took the teachers out and told them, you'll get all these examples around your school. Actually, there's a tree here, there's a shrub, and it didn't occur to them that they could show these examples to children around.
Exactly.
So
and also,
really,
absolutely. And also, there's somebody else who has, there are a couple of questions. So Asta says, I have a question that's not strictly connected to the Adda description. Can I ask? And Asta, please unmute yourself. It's a small group here, so feel free to. And then we have another question from Ananya. So we'll take Asta's first, and then yes. Asta, feel free to unmute yourself and join the conversation.
So I'm in the middle of developing some sort of curriculum for older children centered around conservation practices. And I want to move away a little bit from the strictly textbook information that's out there. So I'm looking for learning materials and resources where I can get into this question of how to balance industrial/economic activity with conservation practices. Especially with things like, the Dibang Valley Dam that's going to happen, and the environment impact assessment procedures that have been relaxed now.
That's right.
So I recently attended a talk where the principal scientific advisor was in discussion with, there was some Ashoka University policy discussion happening. So he said, this question was asked, how do you justify this relaxation in the norms that is happening? When you talk about conservation, etc. So he said, we can't, there is no yes or no, and there is no either or approach. So I just want you as somebody who's into, you're part of the Nature Conservation Foundation, where do we begin to, how do we talk about this? How do we go about discussing this, learning this in a very methodical, practical, everyday implementable sense? Not I don't want a purely academic discussion, but what do we go out there and do actually?
Right.
Asta, where are you based currently? If you don't mind me asking, and what age group of children are you developing this curriculum?
9 to 12 grades.
Okay, and you feel it's important to introduce these kind of case studies and conversations like this? So I mean, it is. It would be difficult to have that conversation in a space like this, I think, because it's extremely complicated, right? We are living in a world where GDP is supposedly the most important thing. The economy needs to be growing, etc. And so everybody is kind of, pitching one against the other when it doesn't need to. I very firmly believe that while, we tell ourselves that individual actions are important, yes, they are, but we also have to keep questioning the system which allows for destruction of nature continuously. And so I would say that if you're engaging with your students, to keep asking these questions of them, because often I think we tell ourselves, we're switching off the light in our houses, we are stopping using plastic, etc. But all around them, students are still seeing that things, are going on as usual. And so they feel that, what difference does it make their small little changes in trying to make a change? And so to encourage those conversations to happen in school where they are pushing for the narrative to kind of change, that we don't go with this whole thing that, we have to do growth at all costs, where, everywhere around us, evidence is showing that we cannot afford to do that anymore. And to also question the fact that who's making those decisions in terms of how forests need to be what kind of destruction needs to be done in forest area from people who are far removed from those areas. We are refusing to kind of engage with local communities over there. So to have those discussions in your classroom, I think will be very powerful and it'll be very useful. Rather, if you want to add something,
Asta,
you're in that space.
Asta, I wanted to give you an example quickly. When I was teaching 11th and 12th standard students environmental studies, okay? ISC, okay? So this was the time when the BT Brinjal issue was out, okay? So there was, and Jairam Ramesh was the environment minister, had set up a public consultation. So in class with both 11th and 12th, we did a combined class outside of the, outside the classroom. And so talked about this issue of what does it mean when we talk about genetic modification. So give them a bit of an understanding, particularly the non-biology students, to give them a bit of an understanding of what does genetic modification mean, and use visuals, okay? Very simple. Have that conversation and then get them to talk about it in groups, okay? And have a bit of a debate, right? About, those who think that it's an issue and that it's a problem, and those who think that it's not. So the students engage in an absolute conversation and a debate with each other, and you facilitate it, okay? It takes time, but Asta, trust me, it's things like this, which, like exactly what Veena was saying, is it's these conversations and creative ways to have these conversations, okay? And you as a teacher, I mean, all of us as educators or teachers need to, need to develop these kinds of approaches. Now, one thing that did happen is at the end of that conversation, and this was just half a day's work, okay? Many of the kids decided that after school, they would actually create posters, very simple posters of what they understood. I vetted it for the scientific accuracy. And then they plastered it all over the school, and they went into 4th standard, 5th standard, 6th standard, and explained to children what it means. Okay, they took permission in the science class. And over 2 days, this happened in the school. And then the children wrote a letter to Jairam Ramesh, which I then carried because I was participating in the consultation. So what I'm saying is this idea of governance, it's never, it's a part of their civics where they have democracy as a chapter, but in EVS or in biology or in science, we never connect the pieces. Okay? So Asta, these are just examples, and NCF has got its resources. So please, I think, I mean, we'd be I'm sure Veena would be happy to
absolutely,
point you to various resources. If you want any further conversations, feel free to contact either of us. Our emails are available. So
thank you so much.
Yeah, not at all. And I think we'll take Ananya, your question. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and speak? I think we've got Vishnu, we have 3 minutes or something, no?
Yeah. So let's address Ananya's question.
Address Ananya. Ananya, go ahead.
Wonderful question.
My question is actually fairly academic in nature. So I was working on a paper. It was about rights of rivers.
Okay.
There was this judgment in Uttarakhand High Court.
That's right.
So it got me thinking about the nature of personality of nature. Of nature, yes. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts about it. And is there any practical way in which we can actually realize this? Because it's very, you usually think about rights of nature as if you're protecting their interests. So nature eventually becomes call it inferior to the human beings who are protecting their interests. So, I just wanted to know your thoughts about this.
Yeah. Veena, do you want to go? And then I of course, have very strong
Why
thoughts.
don't you go ahead? Yeah. No, why don't you go ahead, Radha? And I can
because I'm just thinking that, in Latin America, and I was just typing that up for you, Arpana, that there's a lot of work on, rights of nature in Latin America, and you can, you go to the website, particularly, go to the internet, particularly Bolivia and Ecuador. But the point here is, and I did write an article about this Uttarakhand issue. It was published in The Wire because it just sort of bothered me a lot. So one thing is when we talk about rights of nature, because today where we're talking in a rights-based framework for everything, whether it's human rights or animal rights or right to food, etc., which is very, very important in a debate. But when we're talking about nature, then you are constructing it in a very different space, because you're saying that as a human, you are according rights to nature. I think there is a serious issue there, because again, it goes back to this theory of you being separate from nature or you being superior to nature, because it comes back to that vocabulary of harnessing nature, of the utilitarian ideas that we talked about, but in a rights kind of a framework. Okay. So that's my real concern, because I think it again goes back to the human protecting nature as opposed to the wisdom of human beings being an integral part of nature, about coexistence, about respect, about the sacredness, about, you know, all of those issues. And also what Vena has been talking right from the beginning about this thing of wonder and, you know, all of that. So I think this discussion on rights of nature needs to be definitely more debated about than it is. Sorry, Vena, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you. And, you know, I think that's where, again, our immersion and our connection to nature makes such a big difference.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
And so when we feel a connect to nature, there's an automatic kind of, you feel a responsibility towards it as well.
Right.
But not to see it as separate kind of entities. And that's what we're slowly trying to chip away at, that kind of thought process. You know, and it's for us, people like us who are in the nature education field, it's scary to see how the textbooks kind of approach this. It's so clinical, it's so like far removed from what the child would experience around them. And we're right now doing, like, we're trying to do some questionnaire surveys, and we're finding, as usual, that most city urban kids know more about animals and nature that's found in South America and in Africa than they know about over here, because they're constantly viewing National Geographic and the thing, which is great, it's good, but they have zero knowledge about what's around them. And often, so they think there's no nature in India. There's nothing fascinating about Indian wildlife and things like that. And that's a pity. And so the kids have knowledge, but they don't have the kind of affective and, you know, emotional connect to nature around them. And that's what we're trying to kind of make small strides towards.
Separating the intellect and the emotion in a sense, because the intellect is important, like
intellect is exactly,
very important to have the knowledge, the science, the understanding the science, understanding you know, all of the principles the concepts, the terms, the principles, the ideas, but at the same time having the empathy to be able to, because as human beings we respond through empathy, no? I mean, when you see some suffering, it comes, there's an emotional response. Then, I mean, there's an emotional reaction. And then the response is a rational thought through response, right? So how do we sort of, I guess we could go on for hours, no, Vena? I think we triggered this.
I want to just quickly wrap up by saying that, you know, if you're engaging with your students or children on nature learning, try and include as much as an inquiry-based approach as possible. Especially, you know, you may be queasy as adults towards certain elements of nature, right? So I know a lot of people who don't like lizards or, you know, spiders, but they find that, you know, parents often pass on that fear to their children. But if you can then have a more inquiry-based kind of conversation with them, saying, okay, what do you think this lizard is doing over here? Why do you think it's calling in that particular way? And you don't have to have the answers, but to trigger off this questioning in the child, and for them to kind of have a connect with it and, you know, look at it and engage with it, and to observe it. And that kind of has shown that it triggers a lot of other kind of learning systems in the child as well as they grow up. And, you know, it improves their creative kind of reasoning, creative processes, reasoning processes, their logical processes, which I'm sure you would agree is really important.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Vishnu, over to you, because we could go on forever.
Because we're so passionate about the subject that we are like.
I wish the next time this group meets, it's not online, but, you know, somewhere in Valparai or or at least. Okay, so great. I think a lot of interesting points came up, and I would encourage the people who were on this conference to, if you're interested, be in touch with Radha, Vena, and us. You can write to me, you know, for their contact details.